welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today I'm going to be doing a basilisk of my own design. I thought it'd be really fun to make it kind of plant themed so it looks like a exotic flower hidden in the jungle or something like that. And I'm actually going to be doing a snake type body for this one. Some mythical basilisks are known to be more lizard-like but have like 6 legs. They're really cool. I think it's 6 or 8 legs. Maybe one day I'll do something like that because the design for that type of basilisk is really cool, but most people recognize basilisk by being a more snake type mythical creature. Anyways, let's get started. Okay, so this piece obviously won't have any legs or anything, so we just have a clay head to work with. Now, just because we have a clay head to make doesn't mean I'm going to give myself an easy project. I figured this piece would be a lot of fun to have a mouth that opens and closes. Now, I've done one other piece like this, my mosasaur. It was a while back, so I felt like trying it out again. So since I'm going to be doing a mouth that opens and closes, I need to make 2 different pieces for the head. I need to make the top jaw and the skull, and then I also need to make the bottom jaw separate. So basically, I'm going to start sculpting the top of the head first, that way I have something to work with when we work with the jaw. So I'm going to start with the top of the head first. I have a lump of tinfoil roughly shaped out into the size that I want the head, and I'm just going to drape clay over this. I've rolled this out into a thin sheet and I'm just going to lay it on top of the foil. I'm going to blend everything together, remove any excess clay, and then we can start adding clay to shape the head. So I want to have it kind of viper-like in style, so the back portion of the head is going to be a lot thicker. Plus, I think I'm going to add a bunch of like gems and stones and stuff to the back portion of the head, so I need the clay thick enough to be able to push those into it. Now, the colors that I decided to go with for the basilisk are going to be like greens, reds, pinks, and stuff like that, mainly because I'm going to try and make it look like a living plant. So for the eyes, I wanted them to stand out, so I decided to go with a pair of blue glass eyes. I really like these. They're kind of like cat eyes. And so I'm going to push those into the sides of the head. I'm going to make sure they're nice and even and start building up my clay around them to make the eyelids. After that, I'm going to start getting all the gems and glass beads and different things that I want to add to the face, and I'm going to start pushing them into the back of the head. I decided to go with these really cool green pieces. These are made out of glass. They're going to be the larger pieces, and then in between them I have these little shards of gemstone that I'm going to kind of stick in. So I'm going to lay those out. I'm going to add a texture around them, and then I can start working on the rest of the face. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start framing the upper lip. So I need to decide where the mouth is going to go. Obviously it's going to be at the bottom of the head because we don't have the jaw attached right now. So I'm going to take a strip of clay and I'm going to lay that out to kind of frame where the mouth is going to be. And then I'm going to blend it upwards into the rest of the face. Now, as I was blending this into the face and kind of cleaning up the inside portion of the mouth, I decided that it would probably be best to bake this last and do it at the same time as I did the inside portion of the mouth on the bottom jaw, just so that they can kind of line up as best as they can. So what I ended up doing was removing all the clay from the inside portion of the mouth. I just kind of cleaned it up, removed all of that, and then blended in the lip as best I could into the tinfoil. After I laid out the shape of the lips, I took my tools and started separating them into individual scales. And then on to the other facial features. I decided I wanted to make him look a little bit like a pit viper, so I'm going to add some pits to his face and some nostrils, which are technically kind of the same thing, but not really. I'm putting holes in the front of his face. Now, I don't want to make his face look super busy with all the gems and stuff. I'm afraid that might happen. So I think all I'm going to do is add a nice texture to the rest of the face and then add a few spikes over his eyes. Okay, so I really like how this looks. I'm going to bake this for probably about 45 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. I'm going to have to wait till it's done baking and is cooled before we can mess with the bottom jaw because I need to have it for reference. I need to be able to kind of put the jaw into place and stuff like that. So we have to wait for that to finish baking and then we can work on the jaw. Okay, so our top portion of our head is done baking, it's nice and cool, and now I'm going to start working on the bottom jaw. For the frame of the bottom jaw, I decided to take a piece of wire and bend it into kind of a really open U shape, and then wrap it in tin foil. Now I'm doing this because I want the throat to be kind of soft and stuff like that. I know this will probably make it a little bit fragile, so that's mainly why I'm trying to reinforce it as much as I can with tin foil and wire. And then it's going to be kind of hard to hold on to this while sculpting, so I took my glass container and then I just hot glued it to the very top of it. I made sure to leave enough room to where I can put the face next to it to make sure to get as close to flush as I can. I'm going to try and have it to where the mouth can close, or at least look as flush as possible if it doesn't close all the way. I need to look into different ways of doing this because I'm just going to have a wire frame that connects these two pieces. So I'm sure there's different ways about it, but with the clay that I'm currently using, it's a little fragile, and I'm worried about having like moving parts that are not wire. So I'm going to get this glued in place and I'm going to start covering it completely in clay. I'm going to use the head to mark out where I need to remove any clay and then start sculpting the shapes of the lips and different things like that. Just like we did with the top of the head, I'm going to take a strip of clay and I'm going to lay this out on our jaw and mark out where I want the lip to go. Then I'm going to blend it in and clean it up and try and match it as best I can with the face. Once I have the shape down and I know I like it, I can start adding the shapes of the scales and stuff like that to it. I'm also going to be removing as much clay as I can on the inside portion of the mouth, that way we can sculpt that later. I'm mainly going to do this because the clay is going to stick better to the foil than to already baked clay. I mean, it'll still stick, but it just works a lot better. And then after I have the layout of the inside of the mouth and the lips done, I'm going to start decorating the bottom of the jaw. So I'm going to add some spikes here and there, and then I decided to throw in one of the little decorative glass pieces at the very end. I'm going to add a texture, clean everything up, and then we're going to put this in the oven at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about 45 minutes as well. Now I am going to be removing it from the glass container because it is glued to this, and the hot glue is just going to make it fall off once it's heated up. So I'm going to pop this off first, of course. Okay, so our bottom jaw is all done cooling. We have both of the pieces out of the oven and have cooled to touch, and we can start sculpting the inside portion of the mouth. So mainly what I'm going to be doing is laying out a thin layer of clay and then adding strips of it to make the gums. Now for this creature I decided it would be really fun to have 2 rows of teeth, so I'm going to have 2 rows of strips for the gums. I'm going to blend those together and then we're going to use our tools to kind of push in and make little indents where we're going to add teeth. I'm going to be making the teeth out of something else, so I'm not going to be sculpting them or anything like that. I want the teeth to be a little bit stronger just in case that they bump or you close the mouth too hard. So they're going to be made out of Instamorph, which is a type of moldable plastic, so that way they're nice and strong. So I'm going to do this to the top portion of the mouth and the bottom, make sure that I have enough little holes for my teeth, and then I'm going to bake this again. We're probably going to put them in the oven for probably about 35-45 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. And then once everything is out of the oven and it's cooled to touch, we can start on the painting. So the first thing that I need to do before I primer the face is the little gems are going to be kind of hard to paint in between. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some black paint, water it down a little bit so it's easier to work with, and just kind of paint in between all of our gems. And since the paint is watered down, it's going to be a lot easier to wipe off of the gems instead of letting it dry and trying to peel it all off. So this is just going to make painting that portion of the head a lot easier. And then we're going to have to let this dry. It might take a little longer than normal acrylic to dry because you watered it down, but once it's finally dry, we can start primering everything. And like I said before, we're going to be going with a green color, so I'm going to go with kind of a darker green first and paint everything up. And then once that's dried, we can start working on adding highlights and different details to it. So I'm mainly just messing around with where I want different tones of green. I kind of started off with more of a bluish green and realized that I wanted to have it more of a yellowish green. So I just kept adjusting it here and there until I liked how it looks. And then I wanted the scales for the lips to be a little bit more prominent, so I added a shadowing to them and then I made them a different color. Just a slightly different tint of green. After getting the basic colors down and moving on to adding more detail to it, I decided that I wanted to add a bit more of a metallic touch to it, so I'm going to dig into my metallic paints, find a few greens, and then work on painting the details more of a shimmery color. So I'm going to do the little spikes on the jaw and then probably the little spikes over the eyes. I'm also going to take a little bit of gold and start framing around those lips to add a bit more of a highlight around them. Once I'm happy with the outside portion of the face, I'm going to move on to painting the inside of the mouth. So I'm going to start with more of a khaki color and then I'm going to gradually add pinks to this. And of course I got to do it to the bottom jaw and the top jaw. And then lastly, I'm going to add some white highlights to the face. So mainly around the lips, I'm going to add a bit of a highlight around them and then just here and there. And then after all of our paint has dried and we're happy how it looks, I'm going to move on to taking one of my tools and cleaning off any of the paint that got on the glass eyes. So I'm just going to lightly scratch it off, being careful not to scratch the glass. And then after we have all of that removed from the glass eyes, all our paint is nice and dry, I'm going to mix up some resin and then paint it over the surface of the clay pieces. This is going to have to cure overnight, so we're going to have to wait until the morning to put our head together. Okay, so it's the next morning, all our clay pieces are nice and cured and we can start putting our jaw together. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking the bottom jaw and the top of the head and we're going to connect them using some wires. I'm going to have a wire on one side and the other. I know there's probably better ways of doing this, but this is just the way that I've figured out how to do it, and I do want to work on making this a different way, but I just haven't had the time into looking into how to do it with joints and things like that. So this is currently how I'm going to make my open mouth. So I'm going to take two wires, I'm going to glue them into the back of the head portion, and then I'm going to glue the other half into the back of the bottom jaw. Once our wires have dried into place, I'm going to open the mouth as wide as I can, and then I'm going to take a piece of paper and kind of trace around that portion to see the size of fabric that I need to fill the inside portion of the mouth. So I'm going to kind of trace that, figure out what needs to go inside of the mouth, and then I'm going to cut my fabric to fit. I'm just going to use a plush black fabric for this, and then I'm just going to glue it into place, connecting the top jaw to the bottom jaw. Okay, so our head is almost done. The last thing I need is some teeth. If you notice, we don't have any yet, so I'm going to take my Instamorph and I'm going to start adding pieces to the water. I'm going to be using hot water to melt it instead of my embossing gun, mainly because I'm working with just small pieces and I just don't want to lose track of where they are and have it blown away. So at first I thought I could make the teeth really tiny by just using one bead of the Instamorph, but I decided that I wanted them to be a bit bigger after seeing how tiny those beads are. So for each tooth, to keep them roughly about the same size, I'm using about 3 beads of Instamorph. Now this actually took a long time to do, so I'm not going to film the whole process of it, but in the end it looks like I made fake rice. Now I'm actually going to be using Instamorph for a lot of pieces for this, and one piece that I'm going to be doing is the very end of the tail. So I'm going to make a decorative piece to go at the very end of the wire for the body, and it's going to be basically the inside portion of a flower. So I'm going to take a decent amount of Instamorph, I'm going to heat it up, get it all stuck together, and then I'm also going to add a little bit of paint to it to make it a different tint other than white. So I'm going to add some paint to this, I'm going to mix it up with the Instamorph until everything is cohesive, and then I'm going to start shaping it. And then to make the kind of like portion where the pollen would be, I'm going to roll the tip of this into the Instamorph beads and leave them as is. So this is going to go at the end of the wire for the body. So the body wire is just going to be a long strip, the measurement of the body. So I'm going to attach this to one end of the wire, and then the other end of the wire is going into the back of the head. Now the design for the body, it looks simple and complicated at the same time. Obviously, since we're just making a snake, the pattern mainly just needs to be nice and long and taper off at the end, but I wanted to add some elements to it to make it look more plant-like. So for the top portion of the body, I have the pattern for it broken up into 3 pieces. And then the bottom portion of the body is another piece that's long and kind of tapered off, but I have the very top portion kind of shaped to fit the bottom of the jaw. And then one other feature I'm going to add to the piece is I want to make it look a bit like a Venus flytrap. So it's going to look kind of like a cobra, but the cobra mane is going to be Venus flytrap claws. So I'm going to have a simple pattern on each side that looks like this. So I'm going to start with the fur fabric that I'm going to have at the very front of the body, and this is going to be kind of like a little bit of a mane. So I'm starting off with a very pink fabric, but I want to kind of dingy it up a little bit, so I'm going to use my paint markers. These are actually fabric paint markers. I'll have links down below if you want to check anything out that I use, and I'm just going to take them and I'm going to run some of the darker greener colors through the fur, kind of creating little streaks of darker colors in the fur fabric. So I'm going to use a mix of reds and greens and different things like that just to make the fur fabric look a little bit more realistic. I mean, there's only so realistic I can make neon pink look though. After I've done that, I'm going to let everything dry and then we're going to add some more details to it. I have this really cool yarn that kind of looks like ivy vines or something, and I'm going to cut tiny pieces of it and run it through the fabric. So I'm going to have little chunks of this sticking out. So I'm going to cut a bunch of tiny little holes in my fur fabric and then I'm going to run the yarn through it. So basically to do this, I'm taking a piece of yarn and then I'm going to tie a knot in the middle of it and I'm going to pull the ends of the yarn through the fur fabric. And then this is what our fur fabric looks like with the yarn. I actually think this looks really cool. I might try different variations of this later. Now I'm going to move on to getting all the other fabric pieces ready. Like I said, these are going to be made out of a sequence and I have a nice, really pretty green color for them. So I have my sequence fabric pinned to another layer of fabric, which is going to be the backing, mainly because the fabric is a little sheer and I want to make sure you can't see the stuffing under it. So I have my backing fabric pinned to that and then I have all the pattern pieces drawn out on that. And what we're going to do is we're going to follow all of these lines with the sewing machine. And then after you have everything traced with the sewing machine, you can cut your pieces out. As you can see, I have 3 pieces. I have the top portion of the snake, the bottom portion, and then the tail portion. Now we're going to move on to those weird Venus flytrap pieces. So I just kind of picked a darker, kind of more maroon red for this, and then I just took the pattern and I drew it out on one side of my fabric and I pinned 2 layers together. I have the plush portion on the inside portion of this, and we're just going to take our sewing machine and sew all the way around. The very ends of the Venus flytrap pieces are going to be left open because we're going to have a wire frame, and I'm also going to have more of a claw thing sticking out of it. So when I'm sewing this, I'm going to have to stop my sewing machine at the end and then start back up again. So I'm going to get all that sewn with the sewing machine and then I can cut this out and flip everything right side out. Okay, now we're going to go back to the body. We're going to take that fur fabric piece and then the 2 portions for the top portion of the snake, and we're going to sew these together. So we're basically sewing them one after the other. Okay, so now that we have all the fabric pieces somewhat put together, we're going to start putting the body together. So I'm going to take the bottom portion of the body and I'm going to glue it into place on the bottom jaw. And then I'm going to do the same thing to the fabric for the back of the snake. I'm going to glue that into place, I'm going to let that dry a little bit, and then we can start closing everything up. So the first bit of hand sewing that we're going to do is we're going to take the Venus flytrap pieces and we're going to sew this onto the fur fabric portion. And then one thing that we're going to do is we're going to be making these posable. So I measured out a bunch of wires to go into all the spikes, and the tips of them have Instamorph on the end that are dyed black. So basically just like how we did the very end of the tail, I mixed in black paint to make little black claws for the ends. So I'm going to run these all into place and glue them into place, and we're going to have to let them dry and then we can start closing up the rest of the body. So like I said, we're going to let those dry, and then I'm going to take that black bit of fabric, the part that sticks out of the side of the mouth from us adding the fabric to the inside of the mouth, and I'm going to be sewing this onto the Venus flytrap pieces. Then I'm going to take the belly portion and sew this onto the other side of that black piece of fabric, and then we can take this and sew down the rest of the body. So I'm just going to start sewing down the sides and closing everything up, and as I'm doing so, I'm going to be stuffing the body. So I'm just going to do this until we get to the very end, and then I'm going to glue the fabric to that little Instamorph thing for the middle of the flower. Okay, so now that the body is put together, I'm going to add the teeth to it. So I decided to wait until the body was put together to make sure that I didn't have to worry about bumping them or anything. So now that I know that we're good, I'm going to add the teeth to the inside of the mouth. So I'm going to use E6000 to glue these into place. I'm going to let that glue completely dry, and then I'm going to paint over the teeth and kind of seal everything in with another bit of resin. So I'm just going to mix up a very small amount of resin and go over all the teeth and the gums. This is going to have to cure overnight, so we're going to have to set the body off to the side, which is fine because we need to make all the leaves and the petals for the body. So the petals for the flower for the end of the tail and all the leaves that I'm going to use to decorate the body, they're going to be made out of felt. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to be painting them to try and make them a little bit more realistic. So I don't have them fully cut out, but I have them drawn out, and we're just going to be painting onto this with just watered down acrylic first. And that's going to have to dry too, so I'm going to make sure that the paint is fully dry, and then I'm going to take my 3D paint that I have, and I'm going to make little stems for all the leaves. Now when I first did this, I decided to go with a light green, and it looked really good until it dried, and then it dried too dark, so I went over this again with a white paint. And then once all of our leaves and petals are done and the mouth has finished curing from adding the teeth, we can start decorating the body with these. So I'm going to start with the tail, and we're going to decorate the flower. So I'm going to start with the smaller petals, and we're going to be gluing the first few layers, and then I'm going to be sewing the rest. So we're basically just taking the petals and sewing them onto the body in a spiral pattern. So we're just kind of going and going until we get further down and stuff. Also, I'm going to start with smaller ones, move on to the medium size, and then move on to the large. And then after we have the petals done, I'm going to move on to the large leaves and then start switching from medium to small. And then after the flower is in place, I like how it looks, I'm going to add a little bit of paint to the sequence just to make it look a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to add some kind of khaki colors and different tones of green and just kind of mess around with it. So I think I made a green face hugger, but I still love it, and I really like how his mouth came out and stuff like that. So it was still an interesting project. The flower came out nice and everything, but it kind of looks like a green face hugger. Anyways, I'm going to have him along with a bunch of other creatures in my Etsy shop, so if you guys want to buy anything, make sure to check the links down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!